Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Dono Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for all my continued followers, I want to say thank you. And this is an opinion-based video channel where I try to open your eyes and ears up to some of the travails and tribulations that take place throughout our cities, our states, our country, and sometimes around the world. And just as we are on the precipice of this new presidential election, and many people are either pro-Trump or pro-Biden or against Trump or against Biden, Democrat, Republican, red, blue. We worry about a lot of what's going on in D.C. and our federal laws, which we should be very conscious and aware of, especially when it's involving the Supreme Court, with the recent abolishment of affirmative action and Roe versus Wade. But we should be even have a higher temperament for understanding and knowing what's going on in your city, your local city and state laws, and how your state Supreme Court is ruling and your state politicians are legislating. There are more state laws that affect you on a regular basis and local laws than many of our federal statutes that are out here today. So I think it's important to pay attention to both your state and your federal laws. And this is one straight out of Oklahoma, where the Oklahoma Supreme Court decided to dismiss a lawsuit for the Tulsa race massacre survivors seeking reparations. And they shot it down, which happened in 1921. So for those who are not familiar with it, let's talk about it. Oklahoma Supreme Court dismisses lawsuit of last Tulsa race massacre survivors seeking reparations. The Oklahoma Supreme Court recently dismissed a lawsuit by survivors of the 1921 Tulsa race massacre, dampening the hope of advocates for racial justice that the city would make financial amends for one of the worst single acts of violence against blacks or black people in U.S. history that left as many as 300 people dead and a once thriving district in smoldering fire and ruins. The 9-member court upheld the decision made by a district court judge in Tulsa last year, ruling that the plaintiffs' grievances about the destruction of the Greenwood district, although legitimate, did not fall within the scope of the state's public nuisance statute. Plaintiffs do not point to any physical injury to property in Greenwood rendering it uninhabitable that could be resolved by way of injunction or other civil remedies, the court wrote in its decision. Today we hold that relief is not possible under any of the set of facts that could be established consistent with plaintiffs' allegations. So they shot down the remaining survivors of the Tulsa Massacre of 1921. There are still some people that are alive. Of course, there's PTSD involved in it to have seen, and at least 300 people died, all people of color. The Oklahoma State Supreme Court shot down the idea that anybody should be compensated for that massacre. Messages left Wednesday with the survivors' attorney, Demario Solomon Simmons, were not immediately returned. The city said in a statement that it respects the court's decision and affirms the significance of the work the city continues to do in the North Tulsa and Greenwood communities, adding that it remains committed to working with residents and providing resources to support the communities, the same communities that this city and state burned down in 1921. Now they're all for support of it, 120 years later, or 103 years later. The suit was an attempt to force the city of Tulsa and others to make recompense for the destruction of the once thriving black district by a white mob. In 1921, on May 31st and June 1st, the white mob, including some people hastily deputized by authorities, looted and burned the district, which was referred to as Black Wall Street. As many as 300 black Tulsans were killed, and thousands of survivors were forced for a time into intermittent camps overseen by the National Guard. Burned bricks and a fragment of a church basement are all about that survived today of the more than 30 block historically black district that was once thriving. The two survivors of the attack, Lacey Benningfield Randall and Viola Fletcher, who are both now over 100 years old, sued in 2020 with the hope of seeing what their attorney called justice in their lifetime. A third plaintiff, Hughes Van Ellis, died last year at age 102. The court also determined the plaintiff's allegations did not sufficiently support a claim for unjust enrichment, which is said are typically limited to contractual relationships. Other defendants in the case included the Tulsa Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Tulsa County Commissioners, the Tulsa County Sheriff, and the Oklahoma Military Department. The lawsuit was brought under Oklahoma's public nuisance law, arguing that the actions of the white mob continue to affect the city to this day. It contended that Tulsa's long history of racial division and tension stemmed from the massacre. So what took place 100 years ago is still affecting Tulsa to this day. And you have many people and psychologists, sociologists that even say that what happened with slavery has affected people of color through generation after generation after generation, almost like you are genetically born with this kind of stress and PTSD that happened to your ancestors. I mean, who knows either way if that there is some validity, some scientific validity to it or whatnot. But we do know that the transatlantic slave trade and some of the other devastating things that have happened to people, the Holocaust has had deleterious effects on people even to this day. So it says the city and insurance companies were never compensated victims for their losses, and the massacre ultimately resulted in racial and economic disparities that still exist today, the lawsuit argued. It sought a detailed accounting of the property and wealth lost or stolen in the massacre, the construction of a hospital in North Tulsa, and the creation of a victims' compensation fund, among other things. Public nuisance claims are typically used to address local concerns like blighted homes, illegal drug dealing, or dangerous animals. Such claims were used in lawsuits that states brought against tobacco companies in the 1990s and against opioid drug makers, but many of those led to settlements rather than trials. In 2019, Oklahoma's Attorney General used the public nuisance law to force opiate drug maker Johnson & Johnson to pay the state $465 million in damages. The Oklahoma Supreme Court overturned that decision 2 years later. Wow, Oklahoma is a tough state as far as giving out compensation for some of the egregious and heinous things that have taken place in Oklahoma. I guess they do not believe in civil lawsuits or people's personal rights being violated. This is obvious, and there are definitely people that have heard about the Tulsa 1921 race massacre on Black Wall Street. You've heard rappers talk about it that are educated and know their historical perspective. And in my personal opinion, I think that reparations or some kind of payment, however you want to title it, you have many people that get upset with the term affirmative action, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and even reparations. They all fall under this same umbrella that you have many folks, definitely on the right, that don't think that people should have compensation based on America's past. Well, then where does PTSD come from? How is it that military and war veterans from Vietnam, World War II, some Desert Storm, they get compensated and get taken care of based upon their experiences in the military and at war? And definitely the treatment for PTSD, treatment for Agent Orange. A heinous crime, whether it's a family member, a friend, or abuse, physical, emotional abuse that one experiences in life, falls all under the chasm of PTSD. But to burn a 30-block area of a minority group that owned it and was thriving, and for the citizens back in 1921, and we definitely know what the temperament was during segregation, Jim Crow, the Jim Crow era, that it was very dangerous, it was very fearful, especially for people of color, and for them to, and for whoever to have burned that entire 30-block radius down, and it ended up being the Tulsa race massacre of 1921, is something that should not be forgotten, and it should be paid forward. We are celebrating today, July 4th, 2024, the Day of Independence for America, and to bring up this subject matter is awfully hypocritical for us to talk about the land of the free, the land of the fair, take our country back, that Trump says, but we have a long cadred history of doing very nasty and diabolical things to people of color, minorities, women, any of that class of individuals that have been subjugated to racism, hatred, segregation, Jim Crow, from the past to moving forward. So I definitely think in this Tulsa race massacre, survivors trying to seek reparations for what took place, for the ones that are still alive, I think the Oklahoma Supreme Court dropped the ball and made a huge mistake on not taking care of its people and apologizing and correcting its past. Tell me what you think about the Oklahoma Supreme Court dismissing the lawsuit in the Tulsa race massacre of 1921 for survivors who are seeking reparations, and the Supreme Court said we're not doing it. This has been the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth in a positive, righteous, and God-fearing way.